Let's start off the panel I know you've been waiting for. It's called The Future of Multi-Platform Content, Sports Video, and Advertising in a Changing World.
Wow, you should know how to draw a crowd.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. I've been in this room several times before for weddings. There were a few more people in here the last few times I've been here, but we'll see. You know, maybe people will hear, word travels fast in this social media world. People will hear what a great job you're doing, and they'll all come rushing up here.
I'll tweet about it right now.
We are joined by a panel of experts today who I will introduce by name and then let them really introduce themselves. We have Jonathan Lowe here, who is the Vice President of Marketing for AEG Sports. David Nathanson, let me see if I get this right, because every time I see you have a bigger title. This is Head of Business Operations for the Fox Sports Media Group.
That works.
Sounds good. We have Jeff Husvar, President of Lagardère Unlimited Media Group. Does that mean you have unlimited media?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
You'll tell us about those plans. And William Corbin, Vice President of Digital for Wasserman Media Group. So what I thought we'd do is start off and have everyone kind of tell you behind these great titles what they actually do, and then I'll come back and fire off some questions at you guys.
So, you know, for those of you who know AEG, it's a big company with a lot of different assets, from, you know, music to venues to sports teams. You know, I focus on the sports side. In particular, I spend most of my time on the Kings, our NHL team. We own and operate America's largest cycling race, the Amgen Tour of California. We've got the LA Galaxy, MLS, some minor league hockey teams here in Ontario, and 2 international teams in Europe. Those are the things, you know, for the most part that I'm focused on. In terms of, you know, day-to-day is the marketing, advertising, branding, creative, and promotions. I'd say out of 100%, you know, the most amount of my time is spent on the Kings here in LA, and, you know, focus on promoting the teams.
Right. Fox Sports Media Group includes our sports programming on the Fox Broadcast Network, our national sports networks, including our newly launched networks, Fox Sports 1 and 2, our digital assets, and our regional sports networks across the country. And my role is really to focus on the business across all those properties, league and rights relationships, as well as strategic partnerships, M&A, and ultimately where the business is going.
Lagardère Unlimited is the sports marketing agency division of Lagardère, which is a 150-year-old, 10 billion euro multimedia French-based company, and better known in the US for athlete representation, specifically golf, tennis. Athletes of note would be Phil Mickelson, Jordan Spieth. Tennis side would be Andy Murray, Caroline Wozniacki, and I'm just starting 4 months into the new role to develop a media business here in the US.
I'm William Corbin. I'm with Wasserman Media Group. Wasserman is on one side of the house, we represent athletes, about 1,500 on our roster. We're probably the biggest player in action sports. We have a pretty phenomenal golf practice. On the other side, we consult brands and properties. And my specific role is to work with athletes, brands, and properties and help them in the digital space, specifically, very strategically, in digital and social. And we're about, now with our recent acquisition, our digital group's about 100 people strong. So we're big.
Amazing. We have a great mix of people who work a lot on the traditional side of the business, people who work on the digital side of the business exclusively, and then I think a lot of your jobs are impacted by digital for sure. And here we are a few miles away from either Venice and Playa Vista, where obviously this whole digital renaissance is taking place. And I remember back in my previous jobs, back in the years, there was always this debate between Northern California and Southern California. They thought of us as the arts and crafts side of the business, the content side, and up north was the platform side and the technology side. And I think if anyone doubts the importance of content in today's day and age, you can sit there and look at all these big companies that were historically just Northern California-based companies who are now building massive campuses. Funding all this content that we're talking about. So I guess my first kind of overarching question is, how is digital transforming your business? How is it threatening your business or creating new opportunities? Let's start at the end just to keep everyone awake here. William, you go first.
Yeah, the impact on sports it's caused a major sea change, both in stadium and at home. The device allows people to be connected, and anybody who's a fan of any team, your fan passion is happening over this device and in the digital realm. It's also impacting the leagues and teams and athletes themselves, because how do they capitalize on this? So it's almost at the top of everybody's brain, I would say, in my industry.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it is. So.
I would agree with that. I the way that our athletes touch their fan base is definitely through the digital extensions in various ways. And being at the Boston Marathon this past Monday ago, it was evident to me that the way or new ways that technology can influence the race and the telecast itself. Wearable technology, I think, is going to have a big impact on both television and the digital side. So it's a big space for us.
Yeah, I think for Fox Sports, we don't look at digital as, a pure standalone business. It is part of the business, right? Mm-hmm. And so for us, whether it's how we distribute sports rights or how we connect with or market to consumers, it's all synonymous with the business that we do. So I think probably the biggest shift maybe over the past decade that we've all sort of worked in is, in the past, we used to treat digital as sort of its own sort of area. Now it's fully ingrained in everything we do, from social media to our own platforms to, how we develop programming. It's all part of the same landscape.
Great. I want to come back to that part about programming and how you develop programming with the eye towards digital social in a little bit.
Yeah, from the team side, it's been an absolute game changer. One of the things that, I think is most powerful about digital, it's broken down that barrier between the fan and the team, where before you couldn't get access to, connecting to your team or to your, favorite player, in any real meaningful way. And I think, the digital space has broken down that barrier. I think has created, platforms for fans to create communities of their own, to share, and sort of, build that organic connection with each other, celebrating the team, and then between the team and the fans, growing that passion. For us, it's a lifelong relationship that we want to have. So to be able to have that dialogue and build that community with our fans, I think is the most powerful asset that we have, and digital provides that.
So there are no threats to your business. Digital is only positive. Okay, that's good. We'll keep that. We'll keep that in mind. We'll probe on that in a little bit. But let's talk about the league side. Since you're on the team side, David, you've done a lot of negotiations with leagues and conferences and entities like the World Cup. Leagues are also seeing this as an opportunity. These digital rights are very important. And people used to think, when they think of sports content, they used to think live games and highlights. That's the content that matters the most. Today, we know that's not the only content that matters, but that is at the top of the pyramid. It's the most expensive, most valuable stuff. And you guys control what you have, and you guys are going after trying to broadcast it and get the rights to it. What's the state of affairs with the leagues today in terms of that unique opportunity? They can go direct to consumer in a lot of ways, but they also like the big checks and the guaranteed money and just the confidence to know what their next few years look like. Are the leagues handling this differently in terms of digital rights today and holding certain stuff back? Or what leagues are more progressive about wanting to hold that stuff back versus licensing it out to third parties? I'm curious your thoughts on the kind of the league landscape for sports content.
Yeah, I think the NHL has been very progressive in taking advantage of of the digital space. When you look at how fans are interacting, the NHL and for us, certainly, that touch point and delivering that content, I think it's regardless of the platform. I think we just want to make sure that our fans get the content they want. And obviously, on the team side, we focus on creating content
their digital rights and how free they are with their multiple media rights holders in terms of how those can be distributed to customers versus managing that themselves. You have more emerging leagues, whether it be Formula E or even established leagues like MLS that are much more forthcoming about creating opportunities to connect with fans in every which way, whether it be the newest platforms, Periscope, Meerkat, or the more established social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So ultimately, each league is different. The advantage from our perspective is that because we get to develop and establish relationships with each of our rights holders, we really get to create new opportunities with each one of them. But I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to it.
Before we get to Jeff and William on this, just to follow up, you go into a negotiation with the NFL, you commit to billions of dollars over the next several years for the privilege of producing and carrying their games and selling advertising against it. But you don't have highlight rights and rights to any of the game footage for your website. In a world where you talk about your view is these things are not different today. Ideally, the worlds are colliding in your TV and your digital. What are those conversations like, those negotiations like with a place like the NFL? And at some point, is there a coming to Jesus on the value of those rights when they're holding back these key elements like, highlights and footage and things outside of the games?
Yeah, I mean, look, as first of all, there is no better deal we do than the NFL deal, right? It may be, one of the most expensive, but it's also, one of the most opportunistic and lucrative, right? From any media rights holder's perspective. And so, with very good justification, the NFL takes the position that it wants to control, in part, how their customers and how their fans connect with their content. And the fact that the NFL has multiple media partners, ESPN, CBS, Fox, etc. They have not only many mouths to feed, but also many sponsorship partners to feed as well, who've paid an equally large amount to participate and be a part of that experience. So, really, we're a part of the pie. We try to be the best partners we can to the NFL, and we try to push the envelope every time we have that opportunity. But it's all done in a way that's meant to grow the pie, not necessarily eat away at sponsorship revenue or rights revenue as it relates to the NFL specifically. And I think with other leagues, it's like I said, a completely open book. So it just depends on the rights and the conversations we're having.
Great, Jeff.
Well, for 20 years, I've heard everyone talk about that tipping point where it was going to be too much, and you couldn't divide up the pie anymore. But every time there's a rights negotiation, the numbers keep going up. So I'm amazed. I've been involved in discussions 15 years ago where digital was an afterthought, a throw-in, a concession point. Now, it's 2/3 of the contract.
You know, when I first met you, Jeff, and you were at Sportsline, and I was on the CBS network side, and I remember that, you know, CBS had the rights to stream live and
Right.
handle all the marketing rights to the NCAA men's basketball tournament, and those rights were sitting on the shelf. I remember having the conversation that those rights were a throw-in on that original $1 billion 10 or 13-year deal,
Right.
whatever that deal was. And it was all about monetizing the TV and doing the champions and the corporate partners. And eventually, about halfway through that deal, we're like, guys, we're sitting on this potential gold mine. It's the future of this. You know, you're only showing one game domestically in your market on your local television station. Let's do something with that. And I think that's probably the rest of that story is for another panel. But back in those days,
Yeah.
we were trying to make cases internally that these rights are important, even when you had them. Now you
Right.
can't even really get them. The whole conversation's flipped.
Right. Yeah, that was the first eye-opening, transformational type of project that I was fortunate to work on the Sportsline side. But clearly, it had been an afterthought for 10 years before anybody somebody was paying attention in LA, thankfully.
William?
Mr. Gaines.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo, having probably all of us lived through the digital as added value days. Thank God they're gone, because I felt things of great value were being thrown in. And now it's interesting because we have teams and leagues and brands, et cetera, coming to us and saying, we're doing these rights negotiations, find us more digital assets. So they aren't a throw-in anymore. And it's great to actually dig in and try to create additional digital inventory almost out of air, because everybody wants it so much, because it's prior to digital or the internet, a brand, a team, et cetera, could not have a one-on-one dialogue with their customer. The only place was possibly on site, but you couldn't talk to them, and now you can. And everybody knows the value of that word of mouth discussion that's going on, and everybody wants in. The other thing I think is pretty interesting that digital's impacted is there's all sorts of new leagues being created. In esports, they're going to create leagues, and they're going to model them around these digital assets, and it will be driving conversion, not driving branding. And so I think the deals are changing a lot, and it's going to force the more established leagues to look at their models a little bit more. And maybe even one day a brand only pays for conversion, the NFL. That'll be a long way from today, but I sort of see that being the way it's going.
So we talk about sports video content. It takes producers to put all this content together. You guys have the benefit of working for both traditional television producers in this space as well as digital video producers in this space. What do the TV producers not understand about digital? We can take as long as you need.
Listen, again, from our perspective, it's all one and the same, right? We have digital producers working alongside our television producers. So I don't think I would phrase it as there's anything a television producer doesn't understand that a digital producer does. However, a television producer is focusing on that medium and creating the best possible experience for fans across that medium. Whereas a digital producer is focused on potentially different size screen, potentially shorter form content versus long form content, perhaps live versus non-live, right? Depending on the social media or digital asset they're using. So I don't think it's a function of one knows versus one doesn't know. It's a different expertise, and they can work alongside each other, which they do at Fox Sports.
The notion of shareability on the television side didn't exist, 8 years ago. So I think that digital producers have a different mindset. I think that the worlds are kind of converging though, to David's point. People's skill sets are cross-pollinating, and when you put them in the same room together, they start to understand what works in both mediums. I mean, does a digital producer have a timer in front of them like a television producer? No, right? And that's a nuance that is not lost on the medium. I think a lot of it has to do with time. you have to fill a certain amount of time for TV, and short form production has a different type of mission statement.
Mhm.
I think I don't want to disagree with David, but a little bit, because I think they're different expertise, but I do think they are different in the sense that the type of content they're producing, because of it's going to a very different device, it requires different nuances. The television's still far more linear. When you're producing for digital, all you're thinking about is shareability. On television, you can't share it. It's there. You're watching it. You just have to make it great, quality, compelling. Online, great, quality, compelling. The compelling has to be there. The great and the quality doesn't always have to be there to get the click. I also think that digital producers and television producers today are missing a tremendous boat, and that both of them are failing to program to the device. I don't know how many people have watched content on handhelds or tablets, and none of it truly leverages the capabilities of these devices. I mean, you can shake them, you can tilt them, you can do all sorts of things with them. And I still have yet to have any content come down to this where if I move it, something happens. And I think you're going to see a lot more, what's the term? Tiptic, or where content that's produced specifically for the device. So when a hit happens, the device buzzes. If you want to see around, you'll be able to bend. And I think the VR world is slow. The VR producers are thinking more along the lines of device capabilities than television and digital producers are today.
What are some examples of the most innovative video content or programming that you're seeing today in the sports space? And I don't mean, Fox is very well known for adding production elements to TV, but I'm thinking in terms of the digital audience and what they see. We've moved beyond the Fox box to a lot more cooler uses of technology in broadcast, as well as uses of this video content in terms of format, structure, the way you tell stories. Are there any things out there that you see today that you think, and they don't have to be your own, but like these are great examples of where this stuff is going in the future? This is really interesting innovation.
And I can talk, on the Kings side, a couple of things, and I guess video content and non-video content as well. Obviously winning 2 Stanley Cups here in the last 3 years has helped hockey, has helped raise the profile, and as a marketer, winning is still highly important to what we do, even though a lot of marketers in sports may not admit it. It's huge. But I've been at AG and working on the Kings a long time. I've been there 12 years, and I remember when we were sort of at the nadir of our state here in the marketplace, and we weren't getting the coverage we wanted from media, and we weren't able to have that voice tell our story through editorial coverage. So we created 2 mechanisms to create our own voice and create our own content. Number one was, and this was, I don't know if this is 2009, in response to sort of a lack of traditional editorial coverage, there was a beat writer from the Daily News that had a huge online following, a guy by the name of Rich Hammond. And we brought him on board to the Kings to become our writer. The important thing that we didn't do was censor him. He was, an in-house staff that we took his online platform and brought it to the Kings, called the LA Kings Insider. But he could write whatever we wanted. We didn't censor him. He was there to scoop us if we needed. He had full media access. He was embedded, so we could tell our story. And now there's a new guy by the name of John Rosen who writes for that platform. But now it's not only a digital platform. He's on Fox Sports West. He's on our broadcast talking about, the content and the stories that he's able to get. It's become a huge portion of traffic to our website, to our social assets. He's got, his own Twitter and his own, all those sort of assets created a huge editorial voice that, we've empowered, and it sort of spread to our broadcast partners, that voice. The other thing is King's Vision.
Before you talk about King's Vision, let me just ask you, how far are you willing to give this journalistic independence? It's one thing for them to write their own opinion about the team's playing well, the team's not playing well, but when one of your players is in Las Vegas and gets arrested, if he has that story first, is he breaking that story on your website?
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of the Insider is, full, editorial empowerment like any other writer. And that's the beauty of that. And, the other thing we did is with the fans. So there was an online, and I don't want to take up too much time, guys, but, a huge online community. And again, this is about 2009, that we tried to create our own online fan community. We couldn't compete with these guys. So we brought them into our fold. And again, it's called Let's Go Kings, and it's a fan-generated community that now is our official online fan community. And fans can trash the marketing guy, and they do if they don't like the stuff. And it's a great sort of barometer for the hardcore fan sentiment. And again, it's sort of, you take risks by not controlling that voice, but again, our fans are saying all that stuff, so we can embrace that and empower that. It adds digital metrics, it increases avidity, and those become sponsorable elements as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Fox Sports brand is synonymous with innovation. Actually, Jerry, will you raise your hand? Jerry is probably one of the forefathers of production innovation that created most of the innovative developments that you've seen at Fox Sports, from the NFL to baseball and others. So it's ingrained in our culture. And Jerry certainly helped create that. I think, a few examples I'd just highlight. Postseason baseball, in addition to what we'll do online, we had a simulcast when the game was on Fox Sports 1, of having a Saber Matrix only feed called, which was sort of an extension of our website just a bit outside. So being able to target those hardcore fans with that added innovation and insight, both on a linear platform as well as an on-demand digital platform, is something that was extremely successful for us. What you're going to see from us from our first foray into golf and with the U.S. Open Golf Championship this summer, I think is going to progress from a television perspective, certainly innovation and golf coverage like it hasn't been done in decades. So, it's something we're looking forward to there. And then ultimately, I do believe there's very exciting things coming in the virtual reality space, and frankly, more exciting in the augmented reality space that I think, if you apply to live sports, could be a complete game changer for our business. And those are all areas that we're very deep into right now.
Right. Jeff?
From a fan's perspective, I would just say that, technology has helped bring fans and consumers closer to the game and closer to the action. And the offering that television companies like DirecTV has around big golf tournaments really just enhances the experience, the kaleidoscope of following different groups, the ability to create your own leaderboard, to create your own alerts from that, what Masters does on their internal website to complement what's happening on both the CBS side and the ESPN side, I think is really cutting edge considering all the action that they're covering. So I think that virtual reality as well, to complement what David is saying, is going to have a tremendous impact, not only on the consumer side, but also on the way production happens in the field. So I mean, I'm looking forward to it. That's what I think, a couple of years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, that was a big step forward in terms of the consumer experience.
Yeah, I think VR is a total game changer for the consumer experience. But the thing that, I don't know if it's a technological innovation so much, but it's having a tremendous impact. And I see certain companies leveraging the fact that they have a community centered around sports, and from that community, basically building a lifestyle brand, if you will, and then subsequently a media company to fulfill the need of that community for content relevant to the sport they're in. And the two specific ones I'm talking about are an energy drink company that now has a massive media presence, Red Bull and GoPro. Those are true innovations in sport, in my mind. So.
That's a great point. I remember speaking with a senior executive at Red Bull a couple of years ago, and I said, they had just launched the Red Bull Media House. And I said, what's the goal with the Red Bull Media House? And he said, the goal with the Red Bull Media House is to be bigger than the beverage side of the company at some point in the future.
It's a quarter of the way there already.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think they do 2
Massive.
billion US can sales,
Massive.
and they'll do 400 to 500 million media sales this year. I'm guessing.
Well, that's a good answer to the kind of the next question that I wanted to ask, which is sports is often a leader on the leading edge of a lot of the technology and innovation, things around storytelling. But are there websites you go to where is there content that you see not in sports that you think is really kind of the cutting edge, the future of where you see a lot of content going? Where do you like to consume outside of this? You guys are all looking to the future as part of your jobs.
I can take that one to start. I saw something interesting done by Puff Daddy has an agency, and they have a deal with a tequila brand, and they were asked to produce a spot. And he said, rather than a 30-second commercial, I'm going to produce 6 15-second episodics, targeting the attention span of the people. And the first one was really compelling. I actually watched it, and I was like, okay, I sort of want to watch the second one. And I think it plays to, if I was a movie director today, I'd think the platform of Netflix and 13 episodes is far more compelling to tell a story than 2 hours. So I think it's, people taking advantage of the medium are what I tend to gravitate to. And I love Vice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Vice all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're a millennial, so
Yeah,
that
I'm a
makes sense.
millennial. The oldest millennial ever.
Jeff?
To me, there's a lot of, and maybe this is the wrong term, but there's a lot of ambivalence to the actual form factor that, like, I used to be just hyper concerned with what the user experience was on websites that I was associated with, and just would grind on the product experience. And I still, I believe wholeheartedly that if you have a really crappy user experience, it's going to bring down your brand. But the advent of technology these days and what comes out of the box has kind of changed the technology development cycle in my perspective. So to me, it just resonates back down to what's the context, and delivery method aside. I've gone from, a traditional browser-based consumption model personally to probably 90% of it is now on the, my computer is just a work tool. It used to be entertaining. Maybe that's an age thing, but it's, for me, it's more, I just think about what's the quality of the content that I'm looking for, and whether it's Vice or whether it's a news outlet or it's BBC or whatever it is. To me, and I use I use search engines, and however I get there, and the delivery of it, as long as it's smooth and it's easy, it's okay with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's such a tough question because, there's not a single answer. There's so much out there. I think, the best example that I would point to within the company is, where we take a digital first approach to, developing, whether it be apps or whether it be programming. A good example of that is what we did with Katie Nolan, right? Where she started, originally as doing a sports blog. We found her, integrated her into a show, developed a digital show for her called No Filter, and that translated into a new narrative and ultimately her own show called Garbage Time. So, we're constantly looking for not only the next platform, not only the best user experience, but also the talent and the narrative to help deliver that. And I think that's all part of the experience that the sports fan is looking for.
What about you?
Just as a consumer,
Yeah.
to me, YouTube, it's unbelievable how much I go to YouTube, not only for content, but to make purchase decisions. If there's a product that, I want to get or looking at getting, I'm going to YouTube a lot of times before I'm going to Google to look at, that official site. The other paradigm shift for me is when I'm choosing content, I care about more, user and fan reviews than I care about the critics. And to me, that's a shift, from sort of, the expert to the community. As a
A
consumer.
bunch of you have held up your phones when answering the last couple questions, talking about this stuff. Is there an opportunity? Because a lot of people think short form when they hold up their phone. But there's a lot of new long form content coming into the mix, and it seems like the quality is getting better and better. Do you see an opportunity for more long form content, even though people seem to be migrating to smaller devices?
No, I mean, no question, right? I mean, I think Jeff helped build the architecture for our authenticated platform, Fox Sports Go, so he knows the spaces as well as anybody. But I think it's only a matter of time before, companies like Netflix and others start, getting into live long form delivery of sports that, are available across multiple platforms, whether it be a phone, a pad, or your television. So ultimately, I think the screen ultimately becomes less relevant. It's the quality of the delivery and ultimately the quality of the content and how it's produced that becomes extremely relevant.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add, who has kids under 10? Anybody? So my kids sit on the couch and they watch their Apple devices, the same show, in front of a 65-inch.
You sound frustrated.
No, it's fine, but it's like there's a 65-inch television that's 8 feet from them, and they would rather sit on the couch and watch the same show, okay, on their own devices. So, like, consumer behavior is totally changing, and the new generation. I'm not saying my 7 and 9-year-old girls are trailblazers, but it's fascinating to watch. It's fascinating that I have to schedule movie night, right? So that we'll actually watch something together. They would much prefer to watch it on their own.
Interesting.
Just to sort of echo something Dave said is the screen size I don't think will matter at all. Screen size is a function of economics. The more you have, the bigger you can buy. Consumer and fan passion economics don't get involved. If you love your team, you will consume that content if it's on a radio, if it's on black and white, if it's on a big screen, little screen, you'll consume it on any device you possibly can. And so I think in the long run, the quality content and long format can be delivered on any screen, because if you want to watch it, you're going to. And I actually find I watch more longer form content on my mobile screen, not because it's there, but because there is just better stuff available. Mm-hmm. And so the more that comes, the more I'll watch.
Yeah, I think that the user interfaces for the mobile products are better. Yeah. And if you grew up in that world, your intuitive nature, like I was just telling somebody, I love Netflix on my Samsung smart TV, but the user interface sucks.
Horrible.
Yeah. I mean,
every single guide from every single MSO, and sorry if you're out here, suck. Quote me on that.
I'm just amazed that they can go A to Z and have a bunch of numbers, and that's the interface. I'm like, guys.
Oh, it shows me everything my kids watch. Yeah. Suggested Barbie. I don't watch Barbie.
Yeah, I mean, right.
Yeah, a little.
Is there something you're not telling us, Boo?
But Netflix, it is the most appalling user interface I've ever seen. It could be great. You can't even search it.
Right. Still got, what was the PE ratio? 26 to 1 or something like that.
Jonathan, I just think one other thing in terms of just digital, the digital watching experience is the conversations that the fans can have during that. So, for the Kings, our social media spikes during games because that dialogue is happening. So I think whatever the delivery is, I think the key is that digital conversation between the team's social media accounts, so the official LA Kings accounts, where fans are getting, the team's perspective and dialogue while watching, however they're doing it on the same device, on different devices, and fans talking amongst each other when that's happening. And then the ability now with the Wi-Fi enabled arenas and soon with the beacon technologies and all that stuff with, the fully wired in-game experience too. We obviously talked a lot about watching, at home, but obviously the connectivity becomes even more profound. The things you can do with that connectivity become even more profound, for the in-game experience too, because fans are constantly talking, and we're using hashtags, and putting those hashtags up on the jumbotron of fans, showcasing their experience at home or in the arena while the game's happening. And so we're celebrating that connection. It's more than just what's happening on the ice or the field.
So we've talked about mobile, but no one's really talked about social yet. And when you say like you go to YouTube, I'm curious like whether you actually go to youtube.com and start playing around, or whether or not you're consuming most of your content through social media where friends may have posted YouTube videos, and that's how you're surfacing and discovering a lot of your content. I know for me, I'm getting a lot of stuff out of my feed because when you have friends like these, the curation is pretty darn good. So tell me, like, what's the impact of social on your businesses?
You want me to start?
I'd love for you to start.
Okay.
Listen, I think, social is, key in terms of being able to connect with viewers in ways that we never have been before, right? As a broadcaster. It's also key for building talent relationships, right? So that our talent can communicate and build a relationship with their audience and fan base, which ultimately leads to more affinity, which ultimately leads to more people tuning into the shows that they're on. So from that perspective, hugely positive. As a viewer myself, as a social media user, I also use it to, if I'm unaware of something happening, following you on Twitter or on Facebook and hearing your perspective as someone from Baltimore of what's happening in Baltimore, that's of interest to me, right? And it gets me to tune in and find out more information, or at least get a link to something that's interesting to you. So it's an influencer, right? From our perspective, it helps persuade me as a viewer in terms of making me more aware, and ultimately, makes our producers more aware in terms of how they're developing content that's of interest to fans. That being said, we don't let what the conversation is in social dictate what the conversation that we're going to be having necessarily producing for television. And I think that's a very fine line to walk, that, that conversation leads to, whatever the conversation may be being produced professionally on television. I think it's black and white.
Why would it be in a world where all these things are coming together, and, why wouldn't we have a social media producer as a part of your TV team in the truck? And why wouldn't that person influence? Because to me, if, Joe Buck's sitting there talking about something and there's a lot of chatter going on in the social sphere about something, wouldn't you want to have him address it and have that influence a little bit, steer the conversation? I'm not saying dictate, because you make clear you're not dictating. I think that's right. But shouldn't there be a role for that? I'm not just talking about people put comments up on screens and things. I don't really care what one individual has to say, but general sentiment of the audience, not just from one telecast to the next, but ultimately inside of a telecast. Does that have a role?
Yeah, well, again, influence, yes, absolutely. Help connect us more to the fans so we understand what they're talking about at that given moment, absolutely. And that influences the broadcast. But again, dictate the conversation. They don't like this commentator, and therefore let's get rid of that person during the half and replace them with someone else, right? I mean, that's not going to happen, right? So ultimately, there's no question, we do have social media producers across all of our studio shows and many of our live event programming. And they do absolutely allow us to connect to the fans, understand them better, and that does influence the shows. But, it won't necessarily change or dictate, what we're talking about at that given moment, unless that's what the segment of the show is about.
I'd like to think that if CNN had a social media producer last night following me and my hundreds of Baltimore friends' feeds last night, it could have made their coverage a little bit better. It couldn't have gotten much worse. Jeff, anyone else?
Yeah, my having transitioned from digital publishing and now being on the sports marketing side, I've had several conversations. There are athletes and their managers, their family in many cases, and they come and they're looking for advice. Like, what should we be doing on social? My messaging is pretty simple. It's just be yourself and provide an authentic connection with your fans. And if you do that and keep that in mind, then I think everything will work itself out. I mean, look, I saw the onslaught of social media and how it impacted the digital publishing world. I was in the midst of its evolution, and it was really scary to start with, because you didn't know what your writer was going to say or what somebody was going to say about your writer. And then it was like, well, what if he says that on Twitter and then no one comes from the link in his Twitter feed to our website? We're missing this huge monetization opportunity. And it's like, you got to get over yourself in that whole spectrum and just kind of not maybe roll with the punches is not really the right term, but you got to accept that, you know, you can't control consumer behavior, and the best you can do is to encourage it and have your athlete put out an authentic message in our case.
From the lens of Wasserman, we have to focus on our three unique groups. There's the athletes, the brands, and then the properties. On the athlete side, social media actually has a real opportunity, and that's for them to have to extend their earning power beyond their field. And so, like 10 years on the field, during that time, if they actually really work the social media and build up a following, they have a revenue stream beyond that. Prior to social media, you had to be like you go into broadcasting. That was your chance. Or you could be like a George Foreman and catch lightning in a bottle. But social media allows people who aren't the Tom Brady's of the world and don't ever have to worry to actually continue to be an influencer beyond playing. For the brands, social media, as Dave said, you amplify there, you generate awareness there, you interact with your customers there. I haven't seen, and I hear a lot of people talking about it, but I haven't really seen brands reacting to what's going on in social media and changing what they're doing. I've seen some brands, and they've used us to ostensibly cool hunt, to listen in social media and build a profile of a person that they want and show them what they're interested in. And it might impact like their color scheme, but Nike's not changing their shoes because people are talking about it on social media. I do think there will be a day when that does happen. I don't think it'll be real time and you'll be pulling broadcasters, but I do think it can guide a brand as to how to stay relevant, especially when going after the millennials. And then the properties, the social media really is about amplifying what they're doing and engaging with their audience and trying to build it and grow it. So those are really the three ways I see it impacting our business today.
On the team side, I think there's that dichotomy between, the individual athlete and then the team/organization. And I think, historically and for the most part, it's boring to follow organizations. Number one, because they don't have a personality. And number two, a lot of the times they're just regurgitating, a lot of the stuff that fans can get anywhere, stats and whatever. And again, I don't want to keep talking about us, but, the Kings Twitter account, if you haven't looked it up, you should, has gotten a lot of recognition and some lumps, for creating a voice and creating a personality around a team's account.
Smack talk.
What?
You guys are talking smack.
Yeah,
on
we
Twitter.
have, and most teams won't do that because there's risk, and there are times we've poked fun at ourselves. So, two quick examples. One is, after it was 2013, we lost in the Western Conference Finals to Chicago, and the guy's name is Pat Donahue. So he's the real genius behind this account, and he tweeted to the Penguins, who were just eliminated, "Hey guys, you want to grab a drink?" So, and that was, Sports Center, and we went viral after that. I mean, most sports teams wouldn't make fun of just being knocked out of the playoffs in the Western Conference Finals. The other one that really sort of put it on the map, and you kind of have to know hockey a little bit to take this in context, was 2012. Kings have been around for 45 years, never won a Stanley Cup. We're an 8th-seeded team playing the number 1 seeded team, Vancouver. By the way, no 8th-seeded team in the history of the NHL had ever won the Stanley Cup. We win Game 1, Round 1, and we tweet out, hey guys, to all Canadians outside of British Columbia, you're welcome. Now, the context you have to know is that people in Canada outside of Vancouver hate the Canucks. That's the thing. So, an underdog team who won one game talking smack like this, and again, that's not such a revolutionary or that provocative thing, but in that world, it was huge. It was national news in Canada. I mean, it at the time, I think it was the 8th most retweeted tweet in the history of Twitter in 2012, beating like Barack Obama's "Yes, we can." It was insane because it was just at that moment the right thing, taking a risk. And obviously, there's the hockey ops side, there's the business side, and the hockey ops guys don't want to be talking about what our Twitter account is doing. They want to focus on that. So there are a lot of things we've done. We've had Twitter battles with Conan O'Brien when he sort of dissed us, and we've taken some lumps, as well. But I would say, and it's not right for every organization, and it's not right for other teams within the AG portfolio to do that. So there are risks in organizations creating that voice, but there can be benefits to do that. And obviously, our followers went huge after that.
I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the one constituency that pays all of our bills, and that is the advertisers. So let's switch gears here for a second. Sports has always been in a kind of preferential position when it came to advertising because people felt like, here's sports content's the DVR-proof content. You really need to watch it live. The whole idea of sports, if you watch a telecast, is you see enormous amount of advertiser integration built into the telecast. And candidly, the more you have, if done well, the more credibility you have. It's when it's not there, you're wondering what's wrong with this telecast. So there are a lot of inherent benefits that sports has that entertainment doesn't have from an advertising standpoint. But as you sit here and you look at rights fees going up and the amount of money being paid for this television broadcast and digital kind of chipping away and taking a piece of this, I'm curious from an ad sales perspective, is the digital side of it wreaking havoc with the traditional ad sales side of it? And it used to be, what was the Jeff Zucker comment? You're replacing analog dollars for digital pennies or digital dimes or whatever the expression is today. It's really not a one-for-one trade-off yet, although digital is growing. But how much of an impact is digital having on the ad sales side of the equation?
I can just talk from a team side on a sponsorship end. Certainly, we're activating our partners across all of our assets, and digital has become, an increasing focus of ways to activate and engage our partners through our digital assets. And it's also become, is a platform that's a lot more measurable. So,
which is both good and bad.
Correct. Yeah, depending on the success of stuff. And then we're also trying to find ways to better measure, the incremental lift for or from sort of the digital engagement that we can provide partners. So, to us, it's just a whole new level of monetization, and opportunities for our partners, because for the Kings, we're pretty much sold out of in-game assets, so digital is that next frontier that we can engage partners in different ways. And the fun part is just being creative about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think advertisers are demanding, new innovative ways of connecting to viewers. And I think if digital isn't part of your plan with an advertiser, you're almost sort of out of the game instantly. And there's countless examples I can use, but because I see someone we've worked with in the room, I'll point to another person. And around the Daytona 500, Golden Corral wanted to do things, that really spoke to people and athletes' experience around the Daytona 500. So we partnered with Garage Monkey, which speaks to, automotive fans in the digital space, as an authentic platform to develop both television and digital content that highlights athletes presented by Golden Corral in a way that, really engaged not only the audience they cared about, but did it in a very authentic, seamless way. And I think that's ultimately the value that advertisers are looking to create. And we are, constantly exploring and developing new types of experiences for advertisers, both on traditional platforms as well as those that are being developed.
I think the agency world has changed, 3 or 4 times since I've been involved. I mean, the level of measurability that you get from the digital world, I think, has had an influence on television buying. If you think about programmatic and other automated systems and Dutch auction systems people are talking about. So it is that blessing and curse on the digital side. But it also, but that development also affects the way organizations are going to market, and the way that programmers and television companies like NBC and Fox are reorganizing their sales teams. You know, we've seen the sports specific approach, the programmatic approach, the agency approach, now that there's only 6 major agencies out there. So it's just changes and cyclical all times. And, you know, people that are at NBC may say, oh, the agency, focus on the agency approach to sell prime time and sports all at the same time isn't working. We've been doing it for 2 years. And then you'll hear a completely different story from, you know, another part of the company or the buying community. So it's a very interesting shift in the way that the advertising community is changing.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at how I will still get in arguments with people who will say, when's the real shift going to happen? When will the dollars really shift to digital? And I'm like, look at the new fronts going on in New York right now. The shifts happen. Advertisers want digital. It's how you insert them. Actually, the Golden Corral thing you mentioned is a good point, because where the brands, especially in sports, can get into a little bit of trouble jumping on the digital. So you can run an ad on TV during a sporting event and you're safe. If you're Golden Corral and you want to get into NASCAR, you have to do it as a fan. Brands have got to be a fan of the sport to really play in that space and build that connection. Otherwise, they're going to get clobbered. And like by partnering with Garage Monkey, that showed they understood the sport. They knew who to partner with to be authentic and real and really in there. And the brands, I think, that are their advertising dollars are really getting a lot of bang for the buck are doing that. And they're all state in college football. I think they've done an amazing job at truly becoming a fan of the sport.
We talk about advertising, the conversation tends to go to millennials because that's such a core part of the most prominent audience that supposedly these advertisers want to reach. And all you hear about today is millennials, millennials, millennials. How important is attracting the millennial demographic to your various entities? I'll start with you, Boo.
You know, the millennial generation is larger than the baby boomers. That's all I got to say. There's nothing more important than going after millennials for any brand that wants to be alive 20 years from now.
They're elusive, tech-savvy influencers, fickle. Finding the right platform, the right content, the right approach is. I think that brands that do want to be around have to figure that out. And for us, as we search for franchises to get associated with, either to buy or to build, millennial is a consistent, the touch into the millennial world is consistently brought out in forming that strategy. Where do we want to get to? How do we get to them? I think some people are figuring it out. We are certainly in the early stages of figuring out what the right franchises are for that, and as it relates to the sports that we touch at Lagardère. But sports, music, lifestyle, you got to expand I think when I think millennials, I expand outside of sports and think of other larger media spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I think no one can argue with the significance and the value that demographic, what they represent. At the same time, I think the best way to reach that demographic is is to be relevant where they are, as opposed to, again, creating something that you're hoping they'll find, right? Where are millennials today, right? Are they on Facebook, or are they on social media platforms? If we can be the most relevant sports platform and provide sports content where they live, that's how we'll reach millennials, right? As opposed to developing content that we hope they seek us out and find us. And so ultimately, hugely important demographic. But for us strategically, the way we reach them is being relevant across platforms where they live, as opposed to developing content or having rights to content that they have to find us.
Just to press on that point, though, I mean, the example you gave before about Katie Nolan
Yeah.
is a really good example of something that I think really will appeal to millennials. And as you've built out the programming for Fox Sports 1 and 2, you've added things like Street League Racing and things like that, which to me scream, we're going after the millennial audience.
Yeah, well, again, the way we did Katie Nolan was a completely unique we treated that show differently than we've treated any other show we've developed. It's the only show we have on our network where not only is the entire episode available immediately online and across multiple platforms, right, for free, to be viewed. We send clips and highlights immediately, following every episode. She interacts with fans midweek to keep them engaged and create separate content specifically for that audience. We're not doing that with other shows. So you're absolutely right. It does appeal to that audience. And as a result, we try to develop a show that's going to appeal to them as well as a broad base. There's a reason Katie Nolan's show comes on immediately following MLS. It's because soccer is hugely popular amongst that demographic, and we felt and feel that audience would be a strong lead-in to her show, right? So in the television business where you're taking one audience and trying to lead them through to the next, it's the ideal platform to position her. But the way we distribute the content and make it available and connect with fans, we're doing differently for Garbage Time than we have for any other show on the network.
Did the Katie Nolan clips index higher with millennials than Regis's clips?
Good question.
Okay.
Good question. I'll get back to you on that.
Just one last question for you. Sorry, no, one last question for you. If we had this panel 10 years ago and we were asking you kind of who are your competitors, I think you'd probably answer what most people would have thought, right? The big networks and the other sports sites. If I asked you that question today, which I'm actually about to do, who are your competitors? How do you think about your competitive set when you think about the audience you're trying to reach on a Fox Sports 1 or even the Fox Broadcast Network?
Look, the competitors, may be different, and many of them are still the same. I mean, obviously, there are other sports networks. You can't deny that ESPN is a primary competitor. But the reality is that, really it's anybody taking mind share away from live sports content, right? That's a competitor. And whether that's social media, whether that's entertainment, whether that's live entertainment, right? I mean, they're all, competitors for that mind share. And ultimately, what our business is to create compelling content that is going to reach the largest mind share that's of a benefit both to our distributors or advertisers, and ultimately building the Fox Sports fan base.
I like it. Kind of last final questions before we open it up. If anyone has questions from the audience, if you look into your crystal balls 5 years from now, what is the hot topic that we're going to be talking about on this panel 5 years from now? Really think ahead.
My next job title.
It'll be bigger and better. I know that.
Well, I think the one thing that I think about, and it's a benefit to where we're going, and the live in-game experience and probably the broadcast experience is once you can personalize and really fine-tune the profile that entities have around their fans, and able to, it's happening now, and be able to market to them once they enter that arena. The more you know about your consumer, obviously as a marketer, to me, it's a benefit. Eventually we know that you like this player and you bought this thing the last time. And, I know all this thing about you. Once you've entered our building, or maybe when you're watching our broadcast, we want to be able to provide you the most tailored experience possible and sending you offers, discounts, benefits. You like Kopitar, walk by the Team LA jersey and get a discount, on that jersey. On the flip side, I think going to a sporting event is a personal, intimate, but also communal experience. So where's the balance between marketers like me that want to engage you in all sorts of different ways, and when do we need to pull back to allow you to have that experience as a consumer? So I think there's going to be a delicate balance, for sort of super serving stuff and having that connectivity, but also sort of pulling back and saying, look, maybe you just want to go to the game and watch. You don't need to know where the shortest line to the bathroom is. And you don't need that discount on that hot dog you walk by, because so there's a balance and benefit there. And I think that is something we'll all straddle as marketers.
What do you think's hot 5 years out?
Look, I mean,
Crystal ball.
I think we've talked about virtual reality and augmented reality. I mean, we're already starting to see incredible innovations, where a fan can, buy a ticket to essentially view the game from the sideline alongside the coach and the players and have an authentic viewing experience. Having higher quality streams and productions. We're experimenting with 8K around the Women's World Cup in Canada, where the experience from a television perspective is as visually stunning as being there, right? I mean, it's incredible. And then augmented reality, where if you want to play catch with Peyton Manning, you can. Right. I mean, having a completely transformative experience of how you connect with either an athlete or a sport or statistics associated with that sport. All of that is changing. And, ultimately what that translates to is more one-to-one experiences in addition to the broadcast experience. Right. And how those intertwine. I mean, that's ultimately going to be the big crystal ball question, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years.
Cool. Jeff?
I think there's going to be tremendous advances in smart televisions and the way that they can create a personalized experience for you. I'm not sure how it's going to work for sports, but I have a friend who works in the medical world, and he told me that one of the major manufacturers is working on something that it's loosely called like a virtual nurse, right? So there's not enough in-home nurses that are out there to come and visit an aging populace, right? So the idea is, yeah, I know you guys are all going to the porn thing, but hold on, stay with me on this. So just imagine your doctor is able to communicate with you through your television. You have someone who can remind you to take your medication. There's a device that's connected Bluetooth through your television app that can monitor things like your weight and your blood pressure and things like that. So I don't know how that's going to translate into sports, but there's a correlation there.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be really interesting. And it's not just the data, but it's whether you're, what your preferences in terms of the viewing experience are. It's interesting.
William?
Oh, a lot of things. I mean, well, just because you said 8K, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's cool. And the next version will be even cooler. And it is so cool that you will actually sit and watch it for a long time, no matter what's on it. I think drones are just starting to scratch the surface. I heard a guy who said that they'll probably impact society greater than the personal computer did. That's big. I don't necessarily disagree with it. I think in about 10 years, they'll be like mosquitoes in the night. There'll be so many small little things flying around us. Esports is what we'll be talking about in 5 years. And it will be as big as we talk about the NFL today. Especially if the millennial generation continues to gravitate towards esports, and you look at like Machinima drives more YouTube views than anybody else. It's all people playing games, videos of people playing games. And we're working with Riot Games, and they have this game League of Legends. How many people know of League of Legends? Well, if this room was half the age, every hand would go up. 27 million people play it today. It's the most played video game in the world. It's going to be massive, and it's only growing. So
That's great. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. Thinking 5-6 years ahead. So, given that the NFL is the premier media property in life, and given that they're going to stream a game from London, beginning of the season, and given that Facebook spent $2 billion for Oculus and won't make a penny in 5, 6, 7 years, and we found out yesterday that Apple has $200 billion under a mattress someplace in the world. It's not far-fetched that one of those companies either comes in as a serious player for NFL rights or goes and buys the NFL network. What do you think?
you're right. Facebook will
Inevitable.
buy the
Spot on.
NFL, buy the whole league. Small, no, it's small check. For some of these companies, they could do it.
I think the question for them might actually be, is the NFL big enough for them to really care? As big as we think the NFL is, and sports fans as dominant as it is, these companies have such global perspectives on everything they do that at the end of the day, if it doesn't move the needle to the tune of tens of billions, and at that point, maybe even hundreds of billions, they may not focus on it. It may not be a focus. But I think you're absolutely right if you look at this and say the whole IP delivery of NFL games and sports in general, and the streaming versus the pure, what we think of as broadcast, absolutely going to be a player in that. And I think there will be more entrants into the rights space for sure. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the NFL was built on scarcity of product and scarcity of delivery. And we're living in a world, we're headed towards a world where everyone should be able to get every game that they want to see on any device live. And I think that's the ubiquity that we're headed towards. Joe?
Along those lines, kind of two-part question. With the fight this weekend, and I don't know, is it a one-off in some respects? You guys haven't touched on a la carte versus sort of bundling, and do digital technologies push the rights owners and the distribution rights holders more and more toward a la carte? Second part, who wins the fight?
Mayweather. Although strategically it would be better for him to lose the first one because he'll win the second and then they'll have a third one for all the marbles. So if he was thinking economically, he should lose the first one, be the best thing in the long term for his pocketbook. But I was going to ask a question if we had time, getting to your a la carte issue. I mean, we live in a city now where the Dodgers are not on most people's local television unless you have Time Warner Cable. And yeah, exactly. And I don't hear a lot of people screaming and clamoring for it. But ultimately, if that was offered direct to consumer, and if these leagues didn't go through an intermediary who then tried to kind of resell on the rights for sub fees and things like that, there are a lot of people that would pay a reasonable fee in this market to watch the team that they care about that they can't see today. So I asked these guys are the experts, like, what do you think about the local broadcast model, the a la carte model, the unbundling of the cable business?
Yeah, I mean, as the broadcaster in the group, what I will say is that there's huge value to the bundle. Not only is it, the most cost efficient, at least that exists today, to the consumer, right? Even though it may not always appear that way, but ultimately in terms of growing a league or a sports brand, you want to reach as many homes as possible. If only pure Dodger fans and the hardcore Dodger fans or King fans are willing to pay, I'm making a number up, $9.99 a month, right, to watch, that month's Dodgers games, that audience and that fan base will get smaller and smaller and smaller. So the advantage of being available on broadcast television, on broadly distributed cable television, is hugely enormous, not only in terms of being a part of the zeitgeist of what sports fans are talking about, but ultimately in building that fan base so that the next generation of Dodger fans aren't just the ones that are paying for it, at this point in time, but that have, grown up watching it and being exposed to it on the broadest platforms possible.
I think, it's interesting because the bundle, a la carte, et cetera, and you said who wins in the end. I think you'll see a period where the person who has to win in the end is the consumer. And I think in the short term, the consumer might lose because of what David was sort of saying. The reality is the best value is the bundle. But I think that, they really have to step back and say, okay, is what we're doing the best thing for the consumer? And that's the only way that anybody can win. And, I think every consumer is a little different. Some a bundle will work for, some they just want a la carte. I'd be interested to see if in the New York or Boston market, if you blacked out Yankees and Red Sox, if it go over how it's going over in Dodgers, because the fan base a little more vocal. I think there'd be hell to pay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious a little bit on the network side and also the team side. You have companies like Twitter and Facebook that have massive market caps, a lot of growth in their ad revenue, but still very small. And we're into this maybe a decade now, and it seems like every year there's another platform that gets big real fast, Periscope or Snapchat, and it sort of feels a little bit like keep get, like as a content owner, programmer, and so forth. Is there a time when you can actually step forth and not, sort of like not be MTV, like in the music business, right, where I work, we talk about being MTV, right? And it seems like in digital, it just keeps happening. And I'm curious, particularly with sports, maybe because it's so tribal and there's a connected audience there anyways, that there's some kind of way to reverse that model at some point where the next big social platform is sort of a white label, or you push Twitter down and it becomes an infrastructure play where your brand takes flight. Curious if you guys struggle with Twitter and Facebook and what comes next in that domain.
I'll start by saying, I think, trying to, you do that in some ways at your own demise, right? Because ultimately it's to what I said before about reaching millennials. It's not really about creating programming, that appeals to millennials and hope they find you. You need to be where they are, right? And if your fan base is using Twitter or Snapchat or other, platforms, we have to be there, right? It's our, if we're going to build our brand and be relevant to all types of sports fans, whether it's millennials or an older generation or even a younger generation, we have to be where those fans are. And so, yes, if those platforms are short-lived, our participation on those platforms will also be short-lived. But in the event that they take off and you built a platform that's relevant to them, it's hugely significant. And a good example that I worked with Jeff on for many years at Fox is that before soccer really took off, we identified on Facebook that there was a big opportunity to target U.S. soccer fans with international content. And for many years, still to this day, Fox Soccer, our Facebook followers, has more fans than every Fox Sports brand, including the NFL on Fox, right? And it's not because there are not more NFL fans on Facebook in the US, it's because we took the time to build that audience. And so that is now paying off after, all those years.
I mean, on the team side, I agree exactly what you're saying. We need to be able to have a voice on the platforms that our fans are having a dialogue, and want to have a dialogue with us and are having a dialogue with others. And that goes in, knowing your fan base. But I think you want to, just saying it's cool to have 1 million social media platforms, but not having a strategy, a content strategy, an engagement strategy behind those and differing those and making them right for your business, then it's not really worth the time. So we on the team side, engage with the platforms that are most relevant for our fans. And, the Facebook, the Twitters, the Instagrams, I mean, those by and large are, the three most important ones. But we're always trying to experiment with new ones. And again, if there are ones that are lasting and we see fans joining and engaging with, then we'll make that, a much greater focus. But I don't think we're not adding social networks just to sound cool.
But I mean, developing your own apps.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, again, the mobile engagement is huge now. I mean, when you look at desktop versus mobile, so having apps and engaging through that for sure. And also advertising our app and growing new people. So a lot of what we do now is, in-app advertising to promote our app.
Yes, sir.
Just had a question about fantasy football and how you guys see that playing the current NFL landscape. We seem to start as a sideshow and almost, in some ways, towards people's identification with teams, the individual players and their role in their team success.
Let's do you cats.
Well, geez, I think when I was at Sportsline, we bought commissioner.com. I'm going to date myself here, but it might have been 99 or 98 or something like that. And that was pretty cutting edge. I remember we went in one meeting, we went to the NFL or somebody about it, and they were just like, that's never going to happen. And we're like, I'm telling you, this is going to happen. Then you fast forward to 5 years ago, and I meet a guy who tells me he revolutionized fantasy sports by creating a daily game. And I said, holy shit, thank God somebody did something. Because same game he played by a fax machine was the same game we just created online, just made it easier. Now it's all about gambling, betting online, play to play. I mean, I think that's the next transformational issue that all the leagues are going to face is, people, how do you stop? And who would know this? Okay. I just figured that somebody told me this. More betting goes on in tennis on a volume basis than any other sport in the world.
In tennis?
In tennis. You know why? Because you can bet point to point. And at any time, there's no scarcity in tennis. So that way, it could be 3 or 5 events going on any particular weekend. But gamblers love the action of betting point to point. And, I think at some point people they're going to grapple with that in the US for sure. Right?
Okay. Last question. Joe?
One other thing that occurred to me was, and David, you might be on actually closer to this question as well. Been a good moderator, not talking about your own thing, but short form versus long form, and looking at the attention spans that digital seems to be known for. And I don't know if that's a generational thing or it's a platform thing or what it is, but how does it impact the way you guys approach the content that you're creating? David, with television, you tend to focus a little bit more on long form, but you said digital is integrated into it. From a team perspective, from a media platform perspective, how do you guys look at telling good, long, in-depth stories versus the sort of BuzzFeed model of 10 reasons why you want to read this article right this second?
I'll just answer from my perspective. So, for those of you who don't know, the postgame.com, we're a digital sports and lifestyle media company. We partnered historically with Yahoo, but we're an independent entity. And all the things we've talked about today, the importance of being social, the importance of focusing on stories that matter to millennials, that's the kind of storytelling we do. The one rule I have for all of our writers, and we started off as a written media company, written word company, and have evolved to a video business, is you write or you shoot and edit as long as you need to tell the story, no more, no less. So the way we think about length, unlike the previous industries of print and even in long form television, where I've got 30 minutes or an hour to fill, or I have X number of pages and column inches to fill, the internet, to me, the freedom of the internet is about filling content, efficiently, right? Writing and creating content that gets across the point you need to make or the entertaining aspect that you want to bring to the fans, but no need to go over that. So that's how we write. That's the kind of stories we do. And our video content, it's all varied length from 30 seconds to many minutes. You know, we're not doing long form stuff, half-hour stuff. And in our articles, we'll do multi-page, multi-thousand-word stories, or we'll do 2-3 paragraphs. It's really about what's the story, who's the audience, and how long do you need to tell it. There's from our perspective.
Where's Brian Ring? So, so Brian, during this thing has tweeted some comments, which I'm glad you did. Live tweeting, in terms of short form content. So, in terms of engaging fans and developing short form content in this space, absolutely integral into the sports experience. However, ultimately, we are storytellers, right? And we're trying to sell a long form narrative. And if we can combine the value and the consumer usability of both short form while also engaging them and getting them to stay longer with the long form, that's the golden ticket for us, right? So it's finding that medium and working together across them that will allow us to succeed.
Here at the Oscars, we're being played off the stage with the music. So I want to thank everyone for staying and thank these panelists who did a tremendous job. Thank you. Okay. I would love it.
Yeah. How are you? Good to see you.
Doing a lot of work.